We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Christian Picciolini. He is the author of White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Movement and How I Got Out. Christian, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
All right, let's start with your descent into America's Most Violent White Movement. Meeting Clark Martell. Who was he, and how did you meet him?
Well, I think most people think that folks that go down this extremist path come from a broken home or a bad family life, and in fact, that wasn't really my case. My parents are Italian immigrants who came to the U.S. in the mid-'60s, and they often struggled with prejudice, so it wasn't part of my family DNA. But I felt abandoned by them because they worked so often. They were gone 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, and at that age, I didn't really understand why. I thought I had done something to push them away. So I went in search for acceptance elsewhere. And one day, when I was 14 years old, after being marginalized for all those years and being bullied, I was standing in an alley and I was smoking a joint. And a guy pulled up in a Firebird, got out of the car with a shaved head and boots, and the year was 1987, so nobody really knew what a skinhead was in America. And he came up to me and he pulled the joint from my mouth and he looked me in the eyes and said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile." Now, to be honest, at 14, I didn't know what a communist or a Jew or even what the word docile was, but it was as if this man had given me my first lifeline. I was searching for an identity and a community and a purpose, and he was the first one to see my vulnerabilities and then promise me that paradise.
And this is in Illinois, right? At that time,
southwest side of Chicago, 1987, and in fact, Clark Martell was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead leader, and America's neo-Nazi skinhead movement had been born in that alley just a few years before.
Wow. Okay. So this was like you just stumbled into sort of their lair as opposed to their going out and actively sort of like recruiting kids. I mean, because there's a quality of this that is like, it's almost like like Scientology, where, back in my, I don't know, somewhat of my youth, wandering around the streets of Boston, I would get approached by people, Scientologists, and they're like, "You look like you're a little bit lost. Let's see what we can do here." I mean, was there that? How was that the dynamic? A, and B, was that when Martell comes up on you, are you the fifth kid that he had done that to that day, and this was like, Thursdays we go out and recruit type of situation?
Yeah, it's exactly how you're describing it, Sam. It's about these very savvy recruiters who are looking for vulnerable young people that they think that are broken or could use, some acceptance. So it's no different if we're talking about Scientology or if we're talking about neo-Nazi skinheads or what we're calling the white nationalist movement now, or even ISIS. People are looking for, and it's something everybody looks for, identity, community, and purpose. And if we have what I call potholes, those things in life that appear in our path that we just can't navigate around, like trauma or abuse, or for me, it was abandonment or even mental illness or joblessness. If we have these things, these potholes that we keep falling in and don't have the right resources to pull ourselves out, sometimes we get detoured down a pretty dark path, and somebody there will accept us. And somebody like Clark Martell or even me later on, when I learned how to recruit, would actively always be looking for vulnerable people who looked like they were broken or didn't have a whole lot, that we could come in and promise that their problems weren't their fault, they were somebody else's fault. It was always about the other. And that's when we would use fear rhetoric and blaming of other people to remove the blame from them. And in fact, most people that I met in the movement were self-haters. They hated themselves so much for their own situations that they were very willing to project that pain and that hatred onto other people so they didn't have to deal with it. I never met a white supremacist with good self-esteem.
That's fascinating. And so when you went on, and I don't want, we're skipping ahead here, but we'll go back and sort of just do the TikTok, I guess. But when you went out and ultimately became that recruiter, what were there outward signs that you would look for? Would you have to like saddle up to next to someone to get a sense? I mean, how did you know? I mean, I presume you cast a wide net, right? But at one point you start to realize like, oh, I can raise my yield by looking for this sign or that sign. What were those signs?
Well, we would go to places where we knew that vulnerable young people would gather. We would hang out outside of punk rock shows and hand out flyers and look for the kids who didn't look like they had anything. We would go to skate parks. We would go to places where young people who were searching, for inclusion, for an idea of how they could change the world, because young people are idealistic, but they also, are sometimes misguided. And we took advantage of that fact. And it's the same way that now with the internet, that this new metastasis of the movement is targeting people in forums, like gaming forums where they know that marginalized young people are, ADHD forums and mental health forums, schizophrenia and autism, online gathering places where they know that young people who maybe have been bullied, who might be more susceptible to a certain message that's very black and white, they're actively looking for these kind of broken individuals who they can promise acceptance, they can promise an identity to, and a purpose can be focused. Because in real life, perhaps these people are socially awkward, they're not fitting in, they may be bullied, and they're desperately looking for something. And the ideology and the dogma are not what drive people to this, to extremism. It's, in fact, I think a broken search for that acceptance and that purpose in the community.
It's interesting because, as you say this, I keep thinking about that the documentary Mr. Death, about Fred Luchter, I guess, who became the darling, I think, of the Holocaust denial, if I remember correctly, movement in Germany, because he had something to do with like gas chambers in this country or gassing people, and he was just like a lonely guy who all of a sudden like had this whole crew of friends that thought he was great, and it was really all about nothing to do with ideology as much as it had to do with like I have a community now.
No, that's absolutely true, and you see that in inner city gangs. You can see that in any kind of social group, even positive ones where people just want to, feel accepted, and they adopt the same look, the same language, the same actions and beliefs as anybody, in that group does as well. It's really about belonging. We all want to be part of something that's bigger than us, and we all want to establish our identity. And sometimes we do that just by assimilating. And some of us may not be strong enough to be that individual identity. So we tend to attach ourselves to groups, and those groups become bubbles. And sometimes those bubbles have agendas. Sometimes they're positive, and sometimes they're negative. But sometimes they, even though they are positive, have real trouble communicating with other bubbles. And I think that's kind of the shape that we're in today.